Gospel and homily for the 30th Sunday in Ordinary Time, Year C. The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus spoke the following parable to some people who prided themselves on being virtuous and despised everyone else. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee, the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood there and said this prayer to himself: I thank you, God, that I am not grasping, unjust, adulterous like the rest of mankind, and particularly that I am not like this tax collector here. I fast twice a week, I pay tithes on all I get. The tax collector stood some distance away, not daring even to raise his eyes to heaven, but he beat his breast and said, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. This man, I tell you, went home again at rights with God, the other did not. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the man who humbles himself will be exalted. The Gospel of the Lord. Probably no one is quite as off-putting as the Pharisee in today's story. We may well have similar traits, but don't want to recognize them in ourselves. The Pharisee's problem is that he prides himself on being good and virtuous at the expense of this low-life tax collector kneeling at the back. Many people try and convince themselves they are good because someone else is bad or less good than they are. We have all played that game. I think a good example might be the much maligned Magdalen laundries in 1940s-50 Ireland. The church, the state, the families involved, and indeed society at large, overwhelmingly, whether rightly or wrongly, all tolerated the setting up of these laundries for unwed mothers in the first place. But if most of the guilt can be foisted onto the church, which is a soft target, then the others involved might feel a lot less bad about themselves, or even absolve themselves completely, which is precisely what happened. You hear people say, I may not be the best Catholic mother, Catholic father, Catholic priest in the world, but at least I'm not as bad as so-and-so. That's the righteousness we award ourselves. It's called self-righteousness, and the Pharisee in today's gospel had bags of it. So, our goodness is only goodness compared to someone else's badness or less than goodness. That's the ploy of the Pharisee. I can always think of someone who is worse than I am in order to make myself look better. Maybe the little virtue I have comes fairly easily to me because that's the way I've been brought up, and maybe you've been brought up. My parents, for instance, instilled in me that I must be honest. It's no effort for me not to steal. If I did, my parents would have gone ballistic. But someone else may be really struggling with honesty, and when they succeed in not stealing, that's a real breakthrough. It will have cost them 10 times more effort not to steal than it would have cost me. The same applies to other sins. The Pharisee's prayer is bogus because it's exonerating himself at the expense of this poor tax collector. In no way does he see himself as reliant on God's mercy. In stark contrast, the tax collector's only prayer is a cry for that same mercy. In the real sense, the Pharisee doesn't need God. And he imagines that with a few good works here and there, which he keeps bragging about, he can buy his way into God's good books. The tax collector, on the other hand, confesses his own sins, not someone else's. His goodness, or even his badness for that matter, is not in rivalry with anyone else's. For our prayer to be genuine, we cannot but stand alongside him. That is not the same thing as beating ourselves up or being filled with self-loathing. Of course not. It's realizing that we're all at the mercy of God's mercy. Our witness, our good deeds, a response to his love, but they don't buy our way into his kingdom as the Pharisee taught. Whatever my public image, whatever my position in society, I don't need to try and look respectable before God. In fact, I can't. I am what I am before God and nothing more. The tax collector went home at rights with God. The other did not. Thank you all very much for listening, and God bless you all.